What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Brandon's Face. It's the podcast about a playlist. My name is Jonathan Beardsley,
And I am Brandon May.
and we hope you're all having a nice holiday season. It's the week of Christmas, and on this week's episode, we are going to be talking about the best and a few of the worst R&B albums of the year. Um, Before we get into our actual list, we're going to talk about R&B just broadly over the course of the year, as we've done on the past two episodes, which I recommend people check out if they haven't already. We've already broken down our electronic and dance albums of the year, as well as our pop albums of the year. So check that in our archives if you haven't heard those episodes already. I bring those up because, especially pop, because there's a lot of albums this year, that Omar Apollo one, for instance, that you had originally in R&B that I
Right.
feel like could be considered pop. We're going to get into the SZA album, which we have not covered on any episode in terms of a review, but we'll talk about it a little bit here since it's clearly one of the best R&B albums of the record. But she's been very adamant about, yes, there is some R&B on this album. Yes, there's some sad girl shit, but not all music made by black artists that sing is R&B. Do you have any feelings or takes on this?
It's one of those things where in my opinion, rhythm and blues, R&B, comes from a long line of changes. R&B has changed for a long time, but it's
Yeah.
always maintained a little bit of that feeling that you get when listening to it. So obviously, not all music made by black artists who sing is R&B. But conversely, I think that this album is majority R&B. But there's a couple of trap beats in here. There's
There's a pop rock song on there.
right. I was just gonna say there's some guitar music in here. This is great.
I
So
think I think it's as much a pop album as it is an R&B album. It is 23 songs, so it is a lot of things,
one
but
hour and 8 minutes.
yeah, which actually is not as long of a runtime as I was expecting for 23 songs, but that speaks more to modern song lengths, I guess, than anything. Um, yeah, I feel like it's interesting because I had a lot of trouble this year. I always have trouble what is R&B and how do I define it? Because that Alan Raymond album that we talked about last week, that's very R&B adjacent.
Yep.
Um, there's a lot of that Omar Apollo album, very R&B adjacent. That I think he's listed as R&B on most things, which makes a lot of sense. But it's so
But he
like
feels more pop to me.
exactly, that's it. It's not
It,
what it sounds like, it's what it feels like, right?
as soon as you had sent me that pop list, I was like, "Oh my god, it makes a lot of sense. That record is a pop record." And I kept trying to put them in a box, and I think that kind of epiphany was like, "Wow, boxes don't really exist anymore," which is
No.
really cool. I mean, it's really cool, man.
Yeah, they really don't. And he is a great example of that. He's as much Latin pop as he is mid 2000s R&B, but you can slot him wherever you want. I think you and I have talked about being a hybrid a lot on
Hmm.
this podcast over the course of the year. And I think what's cool about our list is we kept it pretty pure to what R&B is defined as, you know? I feel like there's previous years where there's been some more hip hop leaning stuff, maybe some more pop leaning stuff. But in terms of pure R&B, it is not doing well from a numbers perspective. And there's an extreme drop off from the artists at the top to the artists in the middle, which shouldn't be the case and is not the case in most other genres. We've reviewed so many up and coming pop punk albums this year and pop punk bands with not a lot of listeners that when I look at their play counts, a band like Anxious has more plays on songs than Craig David has on his new album.
That's so
Like,
crazy.
dude, it's fucking
That's
wild. The
so
first song on
crazy.
that Craig David album is like maybe 500,000 plays, which is just mind blowing to me. And I get that it's dated and he hasn't been around for a while and isn't really relevant in terms of today's music. But it's crazy that a multi-platinum artist who's pretty much making music that sounds the same as he did when he was at the top of the world can't even like scratch the surface of what people are interested in now. It's so hard to predict. Um, but I think that in terms of 2022 in R&B, it's kind of a weird one. It wasn't really a lot of star power. Last year, I don't have a list in front of me, but I know we had Snow Allegra, Genevieve, Her, Summer Walker, Erica DeCassier, that Gallant EP, the Khalid mixtape. We had a lot of good releases in R&B, but this year felt like we had better albums as a whole, just more from more unexpected places, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make a lot of sense. And it's funny you had mentioned Craig David because he's one of those ones that he's one of those artists that definitely blends a few different genres.
Yes, he does. That album is as much a dance album or pop album as it is a R&B album. But since, we're going to talk about Craig David in a second. So let's just get into the list without any more, because I feel like these are going to spark the conversations I want to have.
Let's do it.
We're going to start off with your number 5. It was an honorable mention from me. And this is Babyface's album, Girls Night Out. Tell me why this is your number 5.
I think that this just elicited old school feelings for me. It brought me back to a couple of the soul records that I own. It just had such authenticity to it, and it was a really cool project where he had the opportunity to rather have some of the biggest female players in the game right now come in and lay down vocal tracks for an album that was extremely well produced, and that kind of shit just speaks to me, man.
Yeah. Maybe we should describe that for people that haven't heard him before this album, or maybe heard that episode. Babyface released an album that is not just an R&B album, but he assembled essentially a female R&B Avengers and put it on this album, and co-produced, if not fully produced, almost all of the instrumentals, and added some little vocal arrangements in there, but he never tries to take the spotlight. This is an album to spotlight the up and coming female R&B artists. And I think for that alone, it's fucking awesome. But the music on it is really what keeps me coming back. What blows my fucking mind is that he is big enough and this album was big enough for a Target exclusive version. Like, there's so few artists that have physical media, especially at Target. So to see Babyface, this album, which if you guys are at Target and you're an R&B fan, that version has a song with Genevieve that is not on here. So she's one of my favorites. We'll talk about her in the EPs section, but definitely check that out. Pick up physical media if you can. Still support artists when you can that you care enough to, because it's important.
Right. Yeah. I try to support artists directly when I can, and I might have spent too much money this year, but that's another story.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm picking up that Babyface one before 2023 happens.
No, you are not. All right, man. Let's move on. We got my number 5, which is Twee. Girls Like Me Don't Cry, which I had it number 1 originally, I think, when I sent you my list. And the reason I moved it back is because I'm not sure it's an album. It could be. I think it is to me. I put the albums that I have ahead of it for kind of being a little bit more fleshed out. I feel like this was I was not expecting her to follow up last year's album with a new album already. So this felt just kind of like a gift. It's amazing that all of the tracks hit. I'm very, very excited to see where she goes next after dropping 2 incredible albums in back-to-back years. I was surprised this one did not make your list, though.
Yeah, I think when I reviewed it, I really liked it. I probably should have thrown it on my honorable mentions. If I didn't, I meant to. I remember it being good, but I think, it's only 7 songs, huh? There were
like 8, yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah, there were a couple of tracks that, and so I guess 2022 was kind of the year of R&B discovery for me, where you've shown me a lot of like deep cut R&B songs that I never would have really given the real time of day they deserved without you and without this podcast that we do, and this playlist that we curate. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the album. It's an album, bro. It's 7 songs. I'm looking at it right now. Daytona was 7 songs. That's an album,
You're
right?
right. You're right. It's an album. It's an album. I'm still gonna put it at number five. It's number one in my heart, though. All right, man. Next up, we have both of our number four, which is Craig David's new album, 22. I think it's his first new album in 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, but his first R&B album, or mostly R&B album, in over a decade, which is why it's on our R&B list and not on our EDM or pop list. How did you feel about his return to form? Do you remember at all when like 7 Days or Fill Me In were like big songs in
I
the early 2000s?
I went back and actually listened to them earlier this week, and I want to. Obviously, I know the songs, but I can't like place where I had heard them first or anything like that. It obviously must have been like the radio or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. This was a cool album, man. I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed breaking it down, and it really surprised me. Normally when we have R&B on the playlist, I typically have to be like in the mood for it.
Yeah.
I think my Spotify Wrapped was that I ended the night with extreme chaos or something along those lines. I typically listen to extreme metal at
That's
nighttime,
Brandon.
and so I don't know why, man. Just
Good night, honey. Put on that Chimera CD, please.
so I typically have to be like in the mood, and normally that's on my drive into work, and so
Sure.
I think I had waited a couple of days after you had thrown it on and then listened to it, and I was like, wow, this is a lot of fun, man. And it had to make my list this year for R&B.
Yeah, he absolutely killed it, man. This one just brought me so much joy. I wish more people were listening to it. I wish it was doing a little bit better numbers wise. I know that doesn't really matter at this stage in his career, and it is doing pretty good considering where he's at in his career, but this album deserves all the love in the world, which is why I'm glad we both had it on our list this year.
Didn't he do a feature recently? Am I tripping? Maybe he needs to do a feature
Um,
or like a duet with Genevieve or something to get back on the radar.
I mean, there's a few duets on this album, but in terms of other people's, he had that I Song. Have you ever heard a love song on Drill collab remix thing that he did earlier this year?
Yeah, that I think that's what I'm thinking of.
You're right though. I think he did have a few features. It's cool to see him working in the space again.
Yeah.
Um, he is currently in Ibiza, I believe, still doing his residency, and from all the footage, it looks like a very good time.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's having a blast over there.
All right, man. Next up, let's talk about your number two R&B album of the year. This one didn't make my top five, but it was in my honorable mentions, and that is the Broken Hearts Club by Sid. I think the reason this one didn't quite crack my top five is because the two main singles for it came out like last fall. So I
Right.
more associate this album with last year because those are still my favorite songs
It
on
was
it.
really early.
Yeah, but I did revisit it for this podcast, and boy, it is a great album. And
It's
I'm
a
glad you
good
put it on
one.
your list because it is easily a top 10 without question. I think she brought it. I'm still trying to decide if it's better than her first album, but it's fucking great. I'm glad you dug this one. I was surprised you did, especially because I think at the point this came out, you were still very back and forth, and I didn't know exactly what type of R&B you might like or not.
Well, I remember because this was so early. This came out in April of this year, and we'd
Hmm.
gotten a couple of singles that we had reviewed last year, and even a couple. I think even at least one single this year.
Yeah.
And I remember that this kind of got me excited for R&B again, man. This was a good album, man. And I also listened to it again this week and last week in preparation. And I remember when it came out, I threw it on my albums of the year contender list because I knew I really liked it. And maybe
Hmm.
it's weird for me, man. I normally use music to put myself into a headspace, but R&B is one of those different ones where I need to be in the headspace to listen to it. And I think once I was in the right headspace for this, and we're going to talk about that a little later on this episode, but yeah, once I was in the right headspace, I was like, damn, this is a fucking good song. This is a good album. It is, I think it's the perfect length for me, even though a couple of the tracks are slower.
Yeah.
At 38 minutes, it's still is engaging for me.
Everything about her style of R&B, from her voice to the music, is very breezy and makes it very easy to listen to, even when it's a
Right.
little more dense.
Yeah, it's easy listening.
All right, let's go on to, I have this as my number two, but we're gonna say it is an honorable number two for you as well. This is SZA's album SOS. Again, we have not done a review for this album yet. It just came out last week. With that said, you text me about this album, which is not something you typically do about an R&B album. So what made you want to go check this out other than me bugging you to check it out? And what did you think when you did?
I saw a lot of buzz about it. I have listened to SZA in the past when she's been on a couple of Coachella lineups, I think, and I always browse that artist list and check out
Mhm.
things that I like. And she's had a number of hits, hasn't she? Um,
Yes.
yeah, she's had a number of
Yeah, her
hits.
album Control
Control in
had like 5
2017.
or 6 massive songs and is probably one of the biggest R&B albums of the last decade for sure.
Yeah. So, and then I saw a lot of buzz about it, and then I knew you were listening to it, and so I was like, you know what, fuck it, let's see what all the buzz is about. And turns out it's very good. Kill Bill is a fantastic song. So,
Yeah, it's very good. It is very long. There's rumors. I mean, she has pretty much said as much that she is going to do a big tour for this album, which Omar Apollo is opening for. She announced all the dates
nice.
for. I'm sure she is getting as many music videos in the can as possible because she is going to disappear again.
Yep.
She didn't really disappear after her last album, though. She just, her label kind of mismanaged the gap in between and were a little weird about letting her release new music when she wanted to. There was also a pandemic in there. All of that
It's
aside,
somewhere
though,
in there.
yeah, she clearly is happy. I feel like this album's a little bit messy because she was like, I don't want any regrets. Like, I didn't want to leave that off the album. I wish I would have put that on. I feel like every song
Fair.
she could get on this album, she put on it. There's a fucking ODB feature at the end of it, man. It's a fun time, man. I think she killed it. She has released two of my favorite R&B albums of the last 10 years, which is no small feat. She deserves all the credit in the world, and I don't give a fuck about awards too much, but I would imagine that she's at least cinched up a nomination for next year.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if she isn't on the Grammy list for next year. Yeah, man, I really enjoyed this album, and I actually was listening to it today. But it is very long, and you know that I do struggle to stay engaged a lot of the time with R&B, so I do actually listen to this in two sections. But I have to say that Old Dirty Bastard feature is great, in that it's cool to hear her with Phoebe. You know.
Yeah, let's talk about that, man. I've been very hard on Phoebe Bridgers on this podcast, and she knocked it out of the park. I think their styles mesh surprisingly well. I figured it would be a solid like feature. I didn't figure it would be a like great collaboration of styles in that way. And it's a masterpiece, man. That's one of the best songs on the album.
Hey, that's really cool to hear, man. I love Phoebe Bridgers, and I think that she really did kill it on this one also. So,
Yeah, much more than Lana Del Rey did on that Taylor Swift album. I'll say that.
Lana Del Rey. Oh my
All right,
goodness.
man. Let's move on here. We have your pick for number one and my pick for number three R&B album of the year, which is "Heart on My Sleeve" by LMA. Oh my Lord, man. This one was hard for me to not put it number one, so I'm glad it made it onto number one on one of our lists. What about it sealed it for you?
It was the first. It was. I think this came out earlier than that Sid album, didn't it? LMA.
This came
I'm
out
gonna look it right up right now.
May? This
Oh,
came out
so
May
so it
6th,
came out
around the
afterwards.
same time.
So this
Yeah,
was this
about a
was.
month later.
I think I knew like as soon as this album dropped that it was going to be one of my favorites in R&B. I don't know, man.
Yeah,
It just speaks to me. I love her voice. It's
it
not
hits.
as, I hate to say this, but I feel like a lot of the singers in R&B right now try to sound like each other, and I don't think that LMA does that to the level of everyone else. And I think her voice is unique. I think The production on this album was great. The Lotto feature was great. The Roddy Ricch feature was great. The Lucky Daye feature was great. And I mean, it's
The
a good
Roddy
album,
Rich
man.
feature is incredible. That song is so fucking good, dude.
It's catchy as hell,
That
man.
song is so good. That's my favorite song on the album,
It's a good
or
one.
has been since it came out, man.
It's a
Yeah,
good
I
one.
feel like she knocked it out of the park. I said that this would be my favorite R&B album since the Snow Allegra one came out, and it came damn close. But there is one other album that I have ahead of it, and it is also your number three, my number one, which is Candy Drip by Lucky Daye. I feel like this one's been very obviously my number one all year. I've said as much multiple times throughout the year, but you did not like this one initially. So to see it on your list at all was surprising. I'm very happy to see it, and you withheld telling me what you thought about revisiting it. So now that the cat's out of the bag, that you like this album a little bit, what made you finally come around?
I was you had talked a lot about it, and it was on the back burner because we listened to an ungodly amount of music, and I was in the mood for R&B one day, and I don't think we had any on the playlist, and I was like, you know what, fuck it. Let's try it again. John spoke very highly of it. I listened to it once or twice, and it just didn't click with me in the moment. And I remember like standing in line, waiting to do something. It could have been the grocery store, or maybe I was at Staples or something. And I put this in my earphones, and it clicked. And I was like, "Oh, this is a fucking banger. This is a great album."
Yeah. I
I
used to be like that with Aqua Teen, man. And then I came home with animal fries one night, just like out of my fucking mind. And I was like, oh, I get this show now.
right.
Yeah, you definitely have to be in the right headspace to enjoy certain things or right moods. And I'm glad you came around, man, because I fucking love this album still so much. I think it's great. I think it's easily the best R&B album of the year. The Sizzle one, time will only tell, so don't get mad at us for that. But good Lord, man, just looking at this one start to finish, there's really not a miss on this album. He knocked it out of the park with literally every song. There's almost no wasted time. I get that the candy drip interlude's a little corny and kind of is very similar to the Michael Scott, and you could make a 100 grand satisfies me, but I like it. I think the album works. And I think that like this is the most he's embodied who he is as a person. The cover could be a little divisive to some, but I feel like that's like just him showing as much of himself as possible in
It's
his
a
most.
little erotic, bro.
Yes, as it should be. As it should be, dude. This guy scraped his way up from like fucking American Idol like 15, 20 years ago to be one of the best R&B stars of the current decade. So props to Lucky Daye, more than deserving of a top spot on each of our lists.
Yeah, it's good, man. I kind of hate how I reviewed it. I remember I was very hard on it. And
We all have those, man.
yeah, and you know I even like the Lil Durk feature. It's a you know it's one of
Yeah.
those, man. I came around, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I revisited it because and then when you had asked, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna tell you shit because
You know what?
it is one of the best ones of the year.
That's fine. Your Little Dirk fandom has been the most surprising thing of
I
2022. I have no idea how you became a Little Dirk fan, but you definitely have over like the past eight
I like
months.
Dirk, bro. I don't know what to tell you, man. I mean,
You're in the
he's
trenches, relax.
fuck, dude. I don't know, dude. I like it. I don't think we should like review his albums or anything, but God, if he's not
Oh, we're not.
catchy.
Yeah, we're not going to, but I don't hate him as much as most people do either. I think he's pretty good.
Right.
All right, that's each of our top lists. Let me do a quick recap here. So my list, I have Lucky Day at one, SZA number two, LMA three, Craig David four, Twee number five. You have LMA one, Sid number two, Lucky Day three, Craig David four, Babyface five, SZA
Somewhere in
pending.
there.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Um, yeah, man, I think you and I both nailed it. We'll get into the honorable mentions here in a second, but I feel like these are the best R&B albums, name power aside, that you're gonna hear this year.
I super agree.
I say name power aside because I feel like there's that tendency when a massive artist release an album that everyone lumps it into their album of the year, whether or not it's very good. And I'm not even saying it has to be bad. There's an artist in our honorable mentions we'll get to that I am shocked didn't make either of our lists given her last album, but it's kind of just the way this stuff goes.
Yep.
Let's get into it. So, honorable mentions, we got a few. We'll just run through them really fast here. Ari Lennox, age, sex, location. Do you think this one just is still too recent for us to have like really sat with it?
No, because SOS came out last week, and it's both on our it's on both of our lists. I think that this one just was shy of the top five. I think it would have been in both of our top tens if we did a 10.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. Another honorable mention, Aaron Ray, Hello Poison. I only threw this in the honorable mentions because I went back and gave it a revisit recently, and I was like, damn, this album is like it's a solid 3-star album. It's really fucking good for what it is. Doesn't quite scratch the surface of great in my opinion, but shows the potential to, which is why I wanted to give it an honorable mention. Any words on this?
I have no words on Aaron Ray, my man.
All right. Well, I know you got some words on Brent Faiyaz, who I moved from my top five into the honorable mentions
I was so
because
surprised this didn't hit your top five, bro. I know you loved this album.
I this is one that I got wrong the other way. Usually I like was too hard on an album. I gave this one a little bit too much credit, and that's just a problem with being a big fan of R&B. You can get so intoxicated with vocal tone and falsettos and the way it goes over these arpeggiated acoustic guitars, or in his case, these like pitch shifted vocals with kind of lo-fi drums that he'll bring in. I love Brent Faiyaz. I love Sonder. I love the whole sound and vibe that they go for. I'm not as in love with the lyrical content of this album. That isn't why I knocked it down, though. I went through it. Most of the songs on this album that are hits came out 2 to 3 years ago. And a lot of the album cuts, when you go back, like
They're
they're
forgettable.
good album cuts, but they're album cuts.
Yeah.
And again, it's in an honorable mention because I think it's a really good album worth mentioning, just not quite album of the year material.
Fair.
All right, next up, Giveon, Give or Take. Did you revisit this one for the pod at all?
Yeah, I listened to it today.
Man,
It's a great album, dude.
was it a it's a hard one to omit. I feel like he's still working out some things as an artist in terms of his formula and his songwriting that can really take his shit to the next level. But he just has this effortless approach to it that's like, God damn, man, just keep going and you're gonna hit gold. Just keep fucking going.
I actually thought the same thing. Like, all right, the next one's going to be a little better, and then the next one's going to be a little better, and I think it's just going to
Hmm.
be he's a builder.
He is. He is. This and the Ari Lennox album, both growers for sure.
Yep.
The one I was mentioning earlier is Kalani, Blue Water Road. Her 2020 album, It Was Good Until It Wasn't, is one of the best R&B albums of the decade. I was kind of shocked that honestly, if I did a top 10, this might be like 10 or 11. Like
Yep.
it's not that high, and I don't know why. I've gone back multiple times. It's good. It's good. It's
Doesn't
good.
grab me.
Yeah, it's weird. And I felt like going into it, I was hesitant because I thought this was going to be the motherhood album that I didn't really relate to, that most artists tend to put out,
Right.
just parenthood album after having a kid. And she's been, very public and posting about her child and like her love of it. I figured it would influence the music more than it did. I'm glad it's still pretty much a bare bones R&B album, but for an R&B album, it's kind of weird that the best track has Justin Bieber on it. And yeah, it's a weird one, and it's a little top heavy. It fades as it gets a little longer, but I feel like songs like Alter, the one with Bieber, there's one with Blast and another one with Sid, but the fact that I don't know the names of the songs is showing kind of the issue with the album. It lacks a real identity within her discography.
Yeah, that's fair. I remember it being really slow for me. So
Yes, it was. All right, man. Last one in the honorable mentions that I threw on here is Money Long, Public Displays of Affection, the album. We just reviewed this one a few weeks ago. It came out, I think, a few months ago, but you and I kind of missed it. It got nominated for a few Grammys, most notably the song Hours and Hours, which I know wasn't your favorite on the album, but I felt like this album would be surprisingly higher in the like 10 to 6 range than I would have anticipated given the names of the artists that released albums this year. But I really liked this album and I hope you got some enjoyment out of it in the short time we've had with it.
I liked it, but again, here this kind of showcases exactly where my disconnect is with R&B. I mean, clearly it's a very well loved album. Clearly, the Grammys liked it or whatever. I don't think that really matters, but it
It
didn't
doesn't.
it didn't connect with me as much as these other albums that are on my top five do. So
All that matters is if Brandon likes it.
that is the only thing that matters. Listen up, artists. I'm just kidding.
That's why it's called Brandon's Face, people. All right. Let's get into a few EPs. And this is going to be the most EPs that we talk about for any genre because there was a lot of fucking good up and coming R&B EPs. First of which is Genevieve's Rendezvous,
Great EP.
a great fucking EP that you and I both like. I'm mad at myself that I still haven't made you listen to her debut record from last year because that thing is a masterpiece. She's clearly going places. Her and Twee are going on this high output shit. I'm a big fan. Love it.
Nice.
Um, next up, another one we just reviewed recently, Josh Levi Disc 2. I know you were a fan of this one as well.
Yeah, I liked it. It's good.
Yeah, very good. Disc 1 came out in 2020. Hopefully we get a full-length project in the next year or two from him. Another one I threw on here. This is Samaria Didn't Start With You, kind of a down-tempo lo-fi trap R&B little project that I really enjoyed. I do not remember your opinion of this album
I
or
don't
this little EP.
I don't think that I hated it, but it was too slow.
Gotcha, which makes a lot of sense. And
Yep.
lastly, Saunders Too Late to Die, which file under Brent Fias. Okay, so not as many worst ofs as I was anticipating, but we do have two nominees that we will briefly talk about. First of which, Chris Brown, Breezy. Oh boy. Good Lord. He released a deluxe edition of this album that is somehow longer. And oh my God, I liked one song on the original. I did not need like 10 more songs of that. I don't know. This album is just everything wrong with not just R&B, it's just music in general right now, and that's not even from a sonic point of view. Like Chris Brown still sounds fine, whether or not you morally still support him is a separate story, but like
Yeah,
in
dude's got
terms
some pipes.
in terms of throwing 25, 30 songs on a fucking album that clearly like you could have cut half of these and made something decent. I just hate it. I hate this fucking approach. Like this is not the SZA album. This does not sound even somewhat thought out or concise. It just sounds like, hey, here's a bunch of songs I made. Give me a bunch of streams so I can go buy stuff.
Right.
Yeah, disappointing, but the song We Embrace, I did feel like was one of his better songs in recent years. Uh, Lastly, I put this one on because of you. This one was in my honorable mentions, but I get
Bro,
it,
this
and that
album was
is
bad,
it's
man.
Division working on my karma. I'm not gonna go to bat for it, man. I will say that the like group vocals on track 2 are still phenomenal. There's a few good like high notes on this album, but it's not their best.
Great voices, terrible boyfriends.
Yeah, good voices, terrible boyfriends. Maybe just need to slow down. They put out an album in 2020 and they've kind of just had diminishing returns with every release since their pretty highly critically acclaimed debut album back in like 2016. I still think that they sound great. If this was just me, it would probably be under my honorable mentions. But since this is a collaborative project and podcast representative of both of our tastes, it's going to go under worst of. I'm sorry, Division, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are. So yeah, man. Am I missing any in worst of? Can you think of anything else?
No, I don't think that I can.
I can't either. All right. that's it for the list. Let's just briefly look ahead to next year before we get out of here.
Yes.
I don't think that we really have any R&B on the calendar announced for next year as of now, other than Kalila, which comes out February 10th, and that sounds like it's going to be very much in the Craig David realm of a blend of EDM and R&B, much different in the form of EDM she is going to use, a little bit darker, maybe a little more drum and bass heavy.
Nice.
But yeah, that'll be R&B adjacent. Her aside, though, we reviewed a lot of singles from Chloe this year. I would really like to see her put out an album next year.
Yep, I remember liking
Um,
all of her singles.
is there any part of you that wishes SZA would have waited a month like to put
Uh
this out, or do you think it even matters anymore?
it doesn't matter. I think she was probably getting pressured by whatever label to release something, and I think she released a good project. You know what I would love to see in 2022 or 2023? Jesus Christ, what year is it?
Yes, 2023.
I would like to see more R&B tiny desk concerts, brass, drums, guitars, the whole nines.
The Usher treatment.
Get the Usher treatment because I think SZA would shine, bro. I think that Chloe would
Oh, it's
shine.
coming.
I
It's coming.
think I think that that format really does play well with R&B, and I think that R&B plays well with that whole scene. So I would love to see more intimate live performances of some R&B stuff. I think that would be really cool. Yeah, man. We'll see what 2023 has in store for us.
I am so glad you brought that up, Brandon. If this episode sounds like it lacked a little soul, which is kind of weird for an R&B episode, it's only because of the albums we're talking about. And I feel like the reason there's a little bit of wind taken out of the balloon is that the best R&B moment this year was not an R&B album. It was the Usher Tiny Desk performance
Yep.
by a long mile. That is everything I love about R&B. That's everything that made me a fan of R&B. That's everything that keeps me a fan of R&B. He is still the all-time king in my opinion and will never be dethroned. But he seems more or less happy with where he's at. I like in terms of a most anticipated for 2023, it's hard to put him on the list because he's always on the list. Anytime Usher is ready to release an album, I'm ready to hear it. But it feels like with the Vegas residency, we might get a single or two, but I doubt we will get that. I do know a few artists that have turned albums in. They have turned
Oh,
their album in, so we will
nice.
be hearing that next year. Gallant has tweeted new album next year. Take that for what it's worth. I will be over the moon if we get that. There's a few other
Already
smaller
calling
artists.
it Galant is John's #1 album of the year next year.
What about a full length from Tone?
I would love a full length from Tone Stith. In fact, I was listening to our playlist this week with my wife, and BED came on, and
Oh God, I'm sorry. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'm
my
sorry.
wife goes, "Is it 2008, bro?"
Jersey Club is back.
Oh
Bring the
man.
bed spring samples
Well,
back.
well. So here's the deal. I don't know if the world is ready for another Usher album, man. I think the problem with the lack of soul, if you will, even with some of these albums, is the production that is based around people's tastes, the world at large's tastes. And I think artists need maybe a little bit more room creatively. I think some artists might be being boxed in, and I really like that SZA came out and was like, "I just killed my fucking ex," and I think
Yeah,
that's part
she's smoking
of
on her X pack
I
right
think
now.
that's part of why we liked it so much because it's authentic. It's got a lot of soul. It's got a lot of heart, and I think that was lacking a little bit this year. So
Yeah, because and heart's a big part of it too. You're so right because there's a few albums we didn't mention. Y5, Amber Mark, Three Dimension, Ravina, Asha's Awakening. All of these were very like sophisticated R&B albums, but they were lacking a little bit of that rawness and that honesty. I wouldn't say they're lacking heart or perspective, but there's something you need to have that it factor to translate now. And I feel like R&B is just on the back burner as a genre in terms of the main five genres we cover in terms of how big it is in the country at the moment. But it does feel like it has the potential to creep back up if the right artists kind of realign themselves. But you got to think the biggest R&B artists of the 2010s, The Weeknd, Frank Ocean, SZA, like a lot of these artists are not R&B anymore and hardly release music. So the genre is in just kind of a free fall, and we'll see who kind of just grabs it, and takes control of it.
Well,
But as of now, it's a struggle.
and if anybody is listening to this podcast, which I know everybody in the world is, who are some up and comers that we either didn't cover or maybe we should know about? Because I feel like artists in any genre really do thrive in the underground because there is that rawness and
Mm-hmm.
because there is that soul and the passion to quote unquote make it sort of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of soul in the struggle. And I think that a lot of artists might not be struggling enough. Not that I want anybody to, but I think everybody knows what I'm saying.
Confessions couldn't have been made without heartbreak. I get exactly what you're
Fair.
saying, my
Yeah, super
friend.
fair.
All right, man. I think we can leave it there for the year. This was a fun year in R&B, but I'm hoping it'll be even better next year. I want to thank you all for joining us this week, but please join us again next week as we break down our top hip hop and rap albums of the year. I'm sure that is going to be a little bit more of a dense episode as there was a lot of really strong contenders in that category this year. I'm really looking forward to it. Um, Please, if you are watching on YouTube, follow the channel, like the video. If you're listening along on Spotify, leave us a review. Make sure to follow the Brandon's Face page. Anything you want to say before we get out of here?
I'm good, my man. This was fun.
You all have a happy holidays. We'll see you next week.
Late.
Peace.